Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Calling it the new common sense of our time, Jeremy Corbyn has set out the most radical agenda any mainstream party has embraced for a generation. There was also a dramatic message for Theresa May. Come up with the right Brexit deal and we will support you. His two tests, preventing a hard border with Ireland and protecting jobs and workers' rights. And he said that if those tests weren't met, well, Labour would push for a general election. Our political correspondent Michael Crick was in the hall.
Jeremy Corbyn is now in almost complete command of his party. They needed harmony, he told his conference, to stick together. Labour did nothing, he warned, when divided. To reach government, they needed unity.
Real unity is based on the freedom to disagree and debate and then come together around a democratic decision, as we've done this week.
All year, Labour's most intense and damaging divisions have been over anti-Semitism in its ranks. Corbyn once again tried to draw a line.
I say this to all in the Jewish community. This party, this movement, will always be implacable campaigners against anti-Semitism and racism in all its forms. We are your allies. We will work with Jewish communities to eradicate anti-Semitism, both within our party and wider society. And with your help, I will fight for that with every breath that I possess.
Rebuilding the state has been a big Labour theme this week, allowing government again to provide public services rather than private enterprise.
Privatisation and outsourcing are now a national disaster zone. And Labour is ready to call time on this racket. We will rebuild the public realm and create a genuinely mixed economy for the 21st century. And after a decade of austerity, the next Labour government will confront the challenge of rebuilding our public services.
Yet a hard Brexit, he warned, would see Britain embroiled in a global competition to undermine business regulation.
The Tory Brexiteers unite the politics of the 1950s with the economics of the 19th century, daydreaming about a Britannia that both rules the waves and waves the rules.
As the government tries to stick by its Brexit strategy agreed at Chequers this summer, Corbyn tried to clarify his party's position.
If Parliament votes down a Tory deal, or the government fails to reach any deal at all, we would press for a general election.
Yet astonishingly, Corbyn was then barely audible when he explained what Labour's position would be if an election didn't happen.
Failing that, all options are on the table.
All options are on the table, but he mumbled it almost as if it wasn't that important. All very strange given the toil that went into agreeing that phrase. Months of wrangling and debate before it was confirmed this week as Labour's public position, and that Remain would be one of those options.
But let me also reach out to the Prime Minister. You see, I reach out to everybody.
The press had been told to expect a major announcement.
Brexit is about the future of our country.
It was this intriguing offer to Theresa May.
I say this to her in all sincerity and helpfulness. If you deliver a deal that includes a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, if you protect jobs, people's rights at work and environmental and consumer standards, then we will support that sensible deal, a deal that would be backed by most of businesses in the world and trade unions. But if you can't negotiate that deal, then you need to make way for a party that can and will.
But was this a new position? What had happened to Labour's 6 stringent tests for a deal on jobs, migration and so on, which Brexit spokesman Keir Starmer had reaffirmed only yesterday?
Was that really a change on Brexit?
Is there a change of tone on Brexit?
On my team, you've been with me all week. No, everybody's agreed on the Brexit position exactly as we set out.
So there's no change then from that?
No.
So six tests still apply?
Yes.
So really, why did he say it? Just summing up where you are.
Over and over again, I think you're trying to find division where there isn't any.
I mean, the party were briefing. This was an important development.
You've been chasing me all week trying to find division that isn't
Well,
there.
I'm trying to understand things, that's why. But I'm a bit puzzled, because we were led to believe that there was going to be a rabbit pulled out of the hat, you know, by Jeremy Corbyn today, and I couldn't see the rabbit and I couldn't see the hat at the end. Okay. It was meant to be that bit about reaching out, but now people like you are saying there's no change of tone.
I think you need greater sensitivity to rabbits and hats, because I think he pulled one out there, which was actually, here's a very explicit offer. In the interest of the country, talk to us.
So you might abstain, perhaps, in the vote in Parliament?
Well,
then they get it through that way?
We're saying, here's what we want. You convince us you can get that, and you've got that, but talk to us now about it in the interest of the country. At the moment, she's having problems talking to her own party, let alone anyone else.
Barry Gardner closed the week by whistling Labour's traditional anthem. They've unveiled distinctive new policies this week and avoided the bloodbath some had forecast. Yet Labour's position on the biggest issue of these times, Brexit, still seems very unclear.
Michael, quick there.
The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has declared that his party is ready to start work on a radical plan to rebuild and transform Britain, and he says his party is ready to govern. In his closing speech at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, he said he would kickstart a green jobs revolution, creating 400,000 new positions. He also said Labour was committed to reducing the UK's net carbon emissions by 60% by 2030 and to zero by 2050. Mr Corbyn said he would only support the Prime Minister's deal on leaving the European Union if it includes a customs union, something Theresa May has ruled out. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg sent this report from Liverpool.
Adored here, on his turf and on his terms, even joining in that familiar anthem.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Hoping to provide a contrast of political primary colours.
Labour trades in hope for the many, not favours for the few. That is our strength, and together we're going to change Britain.
Labour here, more at ease with itself this year. But Mr Corbyn needed to address one big concern.
The row over anti-Semitism has caused immense hurt and anxiety in the Jewish community and great dismay in the Labour Party. I say this to all in the Jewish community. We are your allies.
Applause showing that many here had been waiting for that. But there was a message too to Theresa May. Labour keen not to be accused of trying to block Brexit.
Let me also reach out to the Prime Minister. If you deliver a deal that includes a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, if you protect jobs, people's rights at work and environmental and consumer standards, then we will support that sensible deal, a deal that would be backed by most of businesses in the world and trade unions. But if you can't negotiate that deal, then you need to make way for a party that can and will.
Labour sense power, the power to change, at home and abroad.
We support a two-state solution to the conflict with a secure Israel and a viable and secure Palestinian state. And in order to help make that two-state settlement a reality, we will recognise a Palestinian state as soon as we take office.
Jeremy Corbyn now in control of the party, his crowd behind him, believing you, voters well beyond this hall, are ready for them.
Where the Tories have divided and ruled, we will unite and govern. We represent the new common sense of our time, so that when we meet this time next year, let it be as a Labour government
Our task
is to build Britain. Build a Britain together.
build a Britain for that security together, and we can. Thank you, conference.
This room loved it. Classic comfort zone Corbyn. His belief that Britain is not fair and a bigger state can fix it.
This man looked like a Prime Minister in waiting, a people's Prime Minister.
No one was arguing for alternatives for austerity until 3 years ago when Jeremy Corbyn got elected. Now there is an alternative. Lots of people have got hope.
And it shows clarity and it shows confidence.
Do you think your dad's changed in the time that he's done the job?
Much smoother and he's grown into it. I think we're seeing a new political centre.
Divisions linger in Labour, especially over Brexit. Yet this transformed party is now moving in one direction, to be the country's next leader. His task, to make the radical seem reasonable outside the hall. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Liverpool.
Well, our economics editor Kamal Ahmed is here, and he says he is going to work on a radical plan to transform Britain. Is it achievable, though?
Well, it's certainly radical, Sophie. The notion of whether it's achievable, we won't really know until he enters government, if he is successful in the next general election as he wants to be. And when you do get into government, any leader with a radical plan, as Mr Corbyn has, does face some brutal realities. Britain is a global open market. If businesses here feel that costs will go up, that they're going to lose their rights to their shares, that they'll be forced to nationalise and to sell their companies to the government, then of course they can invest elsewhere, and that means that money that could be used here for infrastructure projects, for example, may go elsewhere. That's called capital flight. That'll be risk number one for Mr Corbyn if he becomes Prime Minister. Risk number two is that employment issue. He said he wants to create 400,000 jobs. Well, the employment levels in Britain are very high already. There are tens of thousands of vacancies in construction, in engineering. So it's going to be difficult for him to create these new jobs given those high levels of employment. But I think Mr Corbyn really here is trying to touch a mood. It's not really about the costings and the achievability at this stage. He's touching a mood he senses is there in the public who have not seen, or many millions of people in the public have not seen a wage rise in 10 years since the financial crisis. The support for tax rises, for example, is at its highest since 2002. He's tapping into that feeling among many people that the economy isn't working.
Kamal Ahmed, thank you.
Well, speaking of the Prime Minister, there's an argument she needs all the help she can get back here in pushing through Brexit. And today she did get an offer from what you might say is an unlikely quarter, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, and in rather an unlikely setting, the heart of his party conference speech. But this being politics, there was a bit of a catch. He said he would support a deal if it included all the things that Labour wants, including a customs union. In the round, there was plenty of policy in Mr Corbyn's speech, which he said they must now take to every part of the country so that when the party met next year, it would be as a Labour government.
How are you doing? Nice to see you here.
He's made this conference all about change, not least in Labour policy. And in his attempt to rise to Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn was changing the tune yet again today.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Yesterday, it was thumbs down to the Prime Minister's Brexit deal if it doesn't meet Labour's 6 tests. But after a tribute to his wife,
Tu eres mi fuerza y mi apoyo. Gracias, Laurita.
Jeremy Corbyn also showed a little love to Theresa May. Perhaps worried it looks like Labour's blocking Brexit, he sounded more open to a deal, but still willing to push her out the way.
Let me also reach out to the Prime Minister. You see, I reach out to everybody. If you deliver a deal that includes a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, if you protect jobs, people's rights at work and environmental and consumer standards, then we will support that sensible deal. But if you can't negotiate that deal, then you need to make way for a party that can and will.
The rest of his message was far more consistent.
We're going to change Britain.
Transform Britain. Change, rebuild and transform. A radical plan to rebuild and transform.
That plan is now pretty familiar. Renationalising rail, water and energy, more money for health, policing and childcare, but also 400,000 new jobs created by tackling climate change.
Labour will kickstart a green jobs revolution and create skilled jobs in every nation and region of this country.
But for all the applause here, there was an admission that not everyone feels able to join in.
The row over anti-Semitism has caused immense hurt and anxiety in the Jewish community and great dismay in the Labour Party. But I hope and believe we can work together to draw a line under it.
But if support for Palestine has sometimes caused the sensitivities, there was no doubt they still fly the flag here.
In order to help make that two-state settlement a reality, we will recognise a Palestinian state as soon as we take office.
The old way of running the world isn't working, he said. And back home, Labour is poised to start anew.
Our task is to build a Britain for that security together, and we can! Thank you, conference!
Jeremy Corbyn's always followed his own agenda, but today he spoke with the confidence that this party now follows it too. He promised his revolution is ready to rise just as soon as the government falls. But on that other great change of our time, well, he may just have confused the party's policy once more on Brexit.
Do the 6 tests still apply?
Yes, we've said it over and over again. I think you're trying to find division where there isn't any.
Have you just softened your Brexit tests?
No.
That is a softening, isn't it?
It's not. That's Jeremy Corbyn. He's a nice guy. Do you know what I mean? He's saying, look, we're in trouble right now. You're struggling, Prime Minister. I'll help you.
So while he and the Prime Minister have similar rhythm, there is no mistaking the difference in rhetoric. Paul Brand, News at 10, Liverpool.
And fresh from that rhythm in Liverpool, if that's the right way to put it, Robert is here. What did you make of Mr Corbyn's big, bold offer today?
So I thought it was real. And why I say that is because when I talk to officials in Brussels, when I talk to those working for other European Union governments, you know, when I talk to Tory backbenchers, they all say that actually a deal that could be done by the European Union is one that could keep some of Chequers, in particular the so-called common rule book for goods, but would have to turn her very complicated customs arrangements into a customs union. And to be frank, that is basically what Corbyn is saying he could sign up to. Now, this, in my view, puts the Prime Minister in a very difficult position because the problem for her is choosing between a deal that is doable and keeping her party together. Because, you know, that is probably a deal that, with Labour support, will get through the House of Commons. It is a deal that Brussels would accept. But maybe 100 Tory MPs would reject it because it would involve her abandoning her plans to do free trade deals. So what a horrible choice she faces. A deal that is a proper, orderly Brexit versus keeping her party together. It's a nightmare that very few Prime Ministers in history have confronted.
It's very difficult. Now, you've just come hot-footed here from recording your programme, which is moved from Sunday to Wednesday and goes out after this, so stay up to watch it, please do. But you had Amber Rudd on. It sounds like she had some rather interesting things to say.
Yeah, I mean, you know, she committed what we call in the trade a bit of news. And that's two things.
Can't complain about that, can we?
Certainly not complaining. And she said two very striking things. One is she is probably the first very senior Tory, she was only Home Secretary recently, to have said that if it's a choice between a no-deal Brexit and a referendum, a people's vote, she would back a people's vote. The other thing she said, which again shows you how boxed in the Prime Minister is, we know that there are about 40 hardcore Brexiters who would vote against her Chequers plan.
Yeah.
What Amber Rudd said is, if she does what those Brexiters want and adopts a so-called Canada plus free trade deal, she would vote against that kind of free trade deal. And she thinks there are about 40 other more Remainy Tory MPs who would also vote against a trade deal of that sort. So it just reinforces the point I made before, which is one of the huge challenges that Theresa May faces is keeping her party together, whatever Brexit plan she comes up with.
OK, so we've said before, who would be Theresa May? Robert, thank you very much indeed.
Jeremy Corbyn has his eye on the prize, but how does he get there? Labour still has a big Brexit dilemma. The only thing we know for sure is that the Labour leader believes that no deal would be a national disaster for the UK. But Theresa May is not about to accede to Labour's demand to stay in the customs union, so would he really prefer a duff deal that could presage a general election? We now have an undeniably clear choice in any contest between the Conservatives and a Labour Party with redistribution at its heart, democratic ownership for workers and consumers, renationalisation, free nurseries for 2-year-olds and another green revolution. But is that enough to win the country? We'll be exploring all that with the Shadow International Trade Secretary Barry Gardiner shortly. But let's begin with Brexit. Labour say they'll back a sensible deal. But exactly what would that deal be? Here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
Blink and you may have missed it. But there was no mistaking it. Jeremy Corbyn shifted the dial back on Brexit. The Labour leader announced that if Theresa May agrees a Brexit deal that protects causes dear to his heart, then Labour will sign up.
If you deliver a deal that includes a customs union and no hard border in Ireland, if you protect jobs, people's rights at work and environmental and consumer standards, then we will support that sensible deal.
The intervention came amid criticisms that Labour had given the impression this week that it would reject any Brexit deal negotiated by the Prime Minister. Today, Jeremy Corbyn clarified this.
Let me say to the country, as it stands, Labour will vote against the Chequers plan or whatever is left of it and oppose leaving the EU with no deal. And it is inconceivable that we should crash out of Europe with no deal. It would be a national disaster.
No change on Brexit was the message from Labour, though Jeremy Corbyn's striking offer to Theresa May did stand out in a speech that was meant largely to focus on the economy. It appears that Labour felt the need to recover some ground to show it won't reject Theresa May's Brexit deal outright and is prepared to deliver what it calls a sensible Brexit. One shadow cabinet member said Jeremy Corbyn was making a serious offer.
I think that is holding out the olive branch to say, Theresa May, I will help you because you're making such a mess of things, but I will help you, but you have to meet our tests. If you don't meet the test, and at the moment she doesn't meet the test, the Chequers deal is a bad deal, no deal is a bad deal, then we will vote it down. We won't vote for it.
But the Unite leader is not holding his breath for a Corbyn-May pact.
So it's a nice offer from Jeremy Corbyn, but you don't think Theresa May can meet it?
I don't think there's any chance of her meeting it.
And can I ask you, do you think what Jeremy Corbyn is saying is that Labour would like to help a sensible Brexit? They're not trying to block Brexit outright?
Absolutely. Corbyn has said that over and over again. My union and Labour campaigned to remain and reform Europe, but we lost the vote, and we have to respect that decision. It's difficult for some because it was, 52-48, pretty close. But you have to respect referendums, and Corbyn has said that.
The leader of another giant trade union also doubts there'll be a meeting of minds.
You've got to question, is that going to happen? There's a feeling that even the Tories, even Theresa May, is not going for a customs union, which would be the best way out. It'd be the best for decent people in our country to have a customs union with the rest of the European Union. But Theresa May's not going for that. And I think he was making that point. He's saying if only they'd do the right things, we'd be with them in Parliament.
A moment of unity after a week of conflicting signals on Brexit. Labour will be hoping the new clarity will protect it against charges at next week's Tory conference that it is seeking to block Brexit.
Nick, well, I'll be talking to Labour's Shadow International Development Secretary Barry Gardiner in just a moment. But first, Jeremy Corbyn made it clear today he wants a general election right now to assess what his speech tells us about how ready he is to lead the country and what a Corbyn government committed to the redistribution of power and wealth would look like. I'm joined by our business editor, Helen Thomas, and our policy editor, Chris Cook. Helen, first of all, what were the main talking points from this week?
Well, so you had three pretty sort of eye-catching, headline-grabbing policies, two today in Jeremy Corbyn's speech. This big package of green investment into renewables, into home insulation, which Labour says could create 400,000 jobs over the next 12 years, which with enough money behind it is doable. The second, a big expansion of free childcare. This is what he had to say on that.
This government's limited childcare pledge has turned out to be free in name only. So today, I can announce that Labour will make 30 hours a week of free childcare available for all 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds.
So that means removing the current earnings cap in the current system at £100,000, genuinely universal, a big increase in the hourly funding rate for providers for nurseries to over £7 an hour, so to address the problems with provision that you've seen in the current system. Now, look, you can question how realistic some of the targets are. You could question how you pay for this. But Labour have already said they're going to raise corporation tax. They're going to, tax higher earners more heavily. But in terms of those two policies, most business groups welcome investment and action in those areas.
They can't have all been sweetness and light. Where were the points of tension?
Well, so John McDonnell's announcement earlier in the week about employee ownership went down very badly indeed. This was the idea that you compel big companies to put 10% of the company aside into a worker-owned fund. The workers would get a dividend of up to £500 and anything over that would go to the government. I mean, that was broadly seen as a tax in disguise. Lots of questions about how it actually works in practice and the potential negative knock-on effects you could see. But more broadly, the concern seems to be, from the business side at least, around tone and whether there's this anti-business rhetoric that runs through a programme which does involve much more intervention, nationalisation of key industries than we've seen for a very long time. And it's that anti-business sentiment, that sort of anti-private capital tone that were Labour to get into government, people worry would hurt confidence, would deter investment and would ultimately hurt the economy.
Chris, what strikes you about all this?
I thought one of the things we saw this week was a really unusual strategic dilemma for Labour. Jeremy Corbyn is the first opposition leader to fight an election, not win and become Prime Minister, and then stay on as opposition leader for about 30 years, since Neil Kinnock in 1987. And that's created quite an odd situation for us, which is that he already has a manifesto. We're a year or so into this Parliament, and Labour already has a complete programme for government. So a lot of the things that we've heard this week aren't the normal sort of headline-grabbing sort of initiatives you might expect to hear from a party that says it wants to have an election right now. In fact, we look at Jeremy Corbyn's speech. This is what he said about that.
We must take our message to every town, city and village, united and ready to win, as we were in 1945, in 1964 and in 1997. So that when we meet this time next year, let it be as a Labour government.
So that creates, I mean, the rhetoric there about going into government immediately is, and the mismatch between that and the sort of scale of the policies they've announced. It's partly explained by the fact there is already a complete manifesto. The strategic
uncosted.
Well, no, it is. It's all right. It's all right. The issue is that they have to they have to keep it warm somehow for the foreseeable future.
But what happens if they have to keep it warm for a very long time?
Well, that's when a new strategic problem comes in, which is that a manifesto which is ideal for 2017 might not be ideal for 2022, and you might have to start throwing things out. It's one thing to add bits of embroidery here or there. When you have to start dropping pledges, that will become more politically difficult.
Thank you both very much indeed. Well, joining me now from the Shadow Cabinet is Barry Gardiner. Good evening. Thanks very much for coming in.
Kirsty, did you honestly say uncosted? Do you remember this?
Yes.
Do you remember this?
Is that an old money?
That's exactly where the costings are. And actually, if you look at the policy that was announced this morning, and that you were talking about the childcare announcement, the money's in there. In fact, it's actually, we think now that it'll actually cost less than we costed at it originally.
Well, let's go back, first of all, and look at Brexit. And you saw there Len McCluskey and Dave Prentice.
Dear, I don't know. And you called me the Shadow Secretary for International Development.
Well, at least you can whistle.
It's international trade.
At least you can whistle. Two of Britain's biggest union leaders saying that Theresa May couldn't possibly agree to this because what you want is a custom union. She's already said a customs union is not in the cards. This is not an olive branch, it's a dirty big stick.
No, not at all. Look, let's look at where we arrived at last week in Salzburg, okay? Because if you look at the two things that were stopping a deal going through in Salzburg, one was the border question in Ireland, and the second was the collection of tariffs. Okay? Now, a customs union, a new customs union, solves both of those issues. And that is why, when Jeremy laid this out originally in his Coventry speech last year, we said these are the key issues that it's going to come down to. But it also protects our just-in-time supply chain. It means that goods can come through into the country without being stopped at the border. And it means our jobs and economy are kept safe.
She has ruled that out. So let's move on to talking about this idea.
But it's a negotiation.
It's a negotiation, but she's already ruled that, and she's moved away from that. And you're actually saying, look, let's try and go back and discuss this one when that's already dead in the water.
Do you know any negotiation where in the end game people don't have to budge slightly? It's called compromise.
And you think that the Conservative Party is going to compromise?
Well, look, who wrote the amendment for the trade bill on a customs union? It was Dominic Grieve, Anna Soubry and Nicky Morgan. They didn't have the courtesy to vote for their own amendment, but they did actually write it. And so we know that there's a group within the Conservative Party who would be prepared to vote for that compromise.
And there's a very big group gnawing at Theresa May's neck
who are
from
trying
the right.
to get us onto a no deal, which you know would be a disaster for this country. And that's why we've got to stop it.
So we're in a situation where now, after Keir Starmer's speech, that we know that all options are up for another vote, including the possibility of voting whether to remain or leave. You heard Tom Watson this morning, you know, heroing up Keir Starmer for that.
Keir's done a fantastic job.
Under what circumstances would remain be on a ballot paper for a future referendum? Because he clearly thinks it might be. Look, what would the circumstances be?
OK, let me take you through the circumstances, because this is a hierarchy you see here. What happens is, if Theresa May doesn't manage to conclude a deal, then actually there is nothing for Parliament to determine. If she manages to conclude an agreement with Europe, she then has to get it through Parliament. If she fails to get it through Parliament, I mean, this is, we would hope, unthinkable that we get to that point.
And you have other
we will apply
rebels voting with you.
We would apply our 6 tests to any deal that she brought back, and we would see if it matched our policy. If it does not, we then have to say, no, that's not good enough. We can then have an amendment, but nothing in that amendment would bind the government. It's not statutorily binding. So at that point, we would then have to ask for a general election. Now, if the government, after 2 years of incompetent negotiation, if they cannot produce a deal in Europe that can get through the British Parliament, then she should stand aside and let us try and do exactly that. Go back into Europe as the government and negotiate.
So you do not see any
forward.
circumstance that, as Keir Starmer talks about Remain, where you're actually going to have a situation for the people's vote and everything else that people say, actually, given everything that's happened, we want to vote again on remaining within the EU. You think that would be anti-democratic?
No, look, there's a hierarchy here. If we can't get a general election, then the next best thing is to say, OK, you are taking the country into chaos, so now give it back to the people in a people's vote. And all options are on the table. All questions are on the table.
Listening to Jeremy Corbyn's speech, Philippe Lambert, who is a Belgian MEP who's on the Brexit steering committee. Now, he says Jeremy Corbyn has spoken out. Labour don't care about resolving Brexit. They want a general election. That's true, isn't it?
Look, let's just be realistic here. There's nothing that we can do to coerce the general election. Do you seriously think that Theresa May is going to stand on the steps of Downing Street and say, you know, I've done such a marvellous deal over the past 2 years, you know, in negotiating nothing, And last year, I called this snap general election thinking I was going to get a great majority. So now I've come back to you after all this chaos that I've thrown the country into, and I'm asking you for 5 more years. Of course, she is highly unlikely to do that. But does it mean it wouldn't be the right thing for her to do? Of course it's the right thing for her to do. If she cannot negotiate a deal, the moral and right thing to do in the interests of the country is to try and let somebody come in who may be able to form a government, negotiate a deal, and stop us going out onto the chaos of no deal.
Let's move on to the cornucopia that was in Jeremy Corbyn's speech. Mental health, Palestinian state, another green revolution, free childcare and so forth, eradicating homelessness, 400,000 jobs, but not necessarily skills. You talk about you're going to pay for it.
If you say them all quickly,
yes,
they can sound as if they're not all really important.
No, but we're in a quite short time span for this programme, so I want my question,
okay,
right?
fine.
And my question is, you say it's costed, but why would people on 20,000 and people on 200,000 be in the same situation for childcare? Why would the people in 200,000 not pay towards childcare under a Labour government?
You know what I want to say to you here? Actually, having children is a benefit for all of our society, and we should value the fact that people are doing childcare. That's why we want to raise the money that the people who are doing the childcare get, but also if we are serious about enabling women to return into the workplace, if they're earning £200,000 a year, yes, they might be able to afford childcare for themselves. But what we have said is 30, and it's about universality. You know, people need to see that they get something back out of society. If they're paying a lot of tax, actually it's fair that they also see the benefits of a society in which everybody cares for each other. Children are valuable. What we're saying is from 2, 3 and 4-year-olds, it's 30 hours a week paid for. On top of that, if it's a top-up, the poorest people would actually have it free, and as it then incrementally goes up in the salary level, they would then pay a maximum of £4 an hour.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Helen and also to Chris. And now to reflect on today's speech and the conference, I'm joined by the Guardian columnist Polly Toynbee and also by the journalist Paul Mason, two close watchers of the Labour Party who were both listening to Jeremy Corbyn earlier. First of all, Polly, on that question about Brexit, is Jeremy Corbyn being disingenuous? They're going to vote down anything that Theresa May comes up with, aren't they?
They've always said they've got 6 tests. The 6 tests were always utterly impossible for her to meet. There was no way that she could, as leader of the party that she's leader of, that they would ever agree to those 6 tests. I mean, Labour is in a different place. It says we need to be in a customs union, we need to be very close to a single market, all the sorts of things that the people sitting behind her and her benches will never accept. So it's not that Labour's being deliberately obstructive, it's where they always started. We want to stay very close in, and her party doesn't.
Paul, from your point of view, was this a radical enough speech, or did he miss the moment? I mean, there was nothing really to trump Brexit in that speech. There was, as I say, a whole conveyor belt of policies.
Look, I think what has happened in the Labour Party is we've had 2 years of it moving left. The Corbyn revolution, you know, went more and more to the left, and I think at this conference it stopped moving left. It consolidated, and in fact, put a kind of hard edge on some of the radicalism. For me, the most radical thing was talking about reviving the high street. They put out this party political broadcast tonight, which is all about reviving small towns. That's a compromise, because it means that those of us who live in big cities and are part of this globalist, cosmopolitan world have to sort of let our concerns take a back seat while we talk about ATM charges in small towns. Buses, not trains. That's radical.
But these sort of things may appeal to the party faithful, but in the country at large, we now hear this whole rhetoric about anti-business, you know, that they haven't done enough work. They didn't speak to people before McDonough's speech.
Look, first of all, there's no, as I knew when I did that job before, there's no single business view on anything. But I don't care if Uber and Amazon think we are anti-Uber and Amazon, because we are anti-businesses that exploit their workers and destroy social cohesion. So absolutely, bring it on, because for every Uber and every Amazon, there is a BAE Systems, there is an Airbus, there is a BMW, there are Greggs who do deals with their workers and respect their employees. That's who Labour stands for.
Now, Polly, moving on to something else now that was very, very important. Did Jeremy Corbyn do enough on anti-Semitism to put an end to it within the party?
I don't think so. I think it's going to hang around his neck for quite a long time. It takes more than that. He's let it drag on all summer, and it infuriated John McDonnell, a lot of other people, when he should and could have brought it to a stop. And when it came to the NEC, he tried to add another addendum. And, it was...
Was there enough apology for hurt in that speech?
Well, he went quite far, but I think it'll take more than that. I think he'll have to go on and on about it, and even then, I think it'll go on being a blemish on his record. But of course, not insurmountable, but you can't just wash it away.
And the loudest cheer in his speech today was when he said he would recognise the Palestinian state on the day he took office. That's pretty bold, isn't it?
Yeah, and I welcome that, because for us, the members, whatever the rights and wrongs of Corbyn's handling, which was not well handled of the allegations, we feel, and this is a lot of us, we feel that we are being stigmatised by a media, by hostile forces who are trying to stigmatise us as a kind of anti-Semitic movement.
No, not as anti-Semitic, but there have been instances of anti-Semitism, no question.
There have, and they're being dealt with through a rigorous disciplinary process. And so for me, the moment when the whole became a sea of Palestinian flags was a great moment of international solidarity from us to our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And Jeremy said it clearly, we are not going to sell arms to a country that shoots down innocent civilians as policy. Sorry, no, we're not. That's what Labour stands for. Other parties may stand for something different.
On Jeremy Corbyn's personal ratings, I mean, party-wise, neck and neck with the Conservatives. In terms of his personal ratings with Theresa May, he's 21% points down on Theresa May. That is not a good place for him to be.
He may have pulled up a bit this week. I think they've had a very good conference. I think they have looked like the people who've got the ideas. Yeah. I mean, everybody else has run out of ideas. There aren't any. There aren't any in the centre, and there aren't any from the Conservatives either. So I think we will probably see his reputation come up a bit. I think that range of policies, terrific retail politics, I think they'll be very popular. Things that used to seem very radical, like renationalisation, are now very popular. The centre ground really has shifted. And it's interesting to see that in the serious press, you're getting commentators saying, my God, the Tories better quickly come up with some ideas, because it's all with Labour at the moment.
And you're going to be coming back and talking about the serious press a little while. Thank you both very much indeed.